Hey there everybody, good news this week. Israel has some extremely shady history, but one of its darkest legacies is finally coming to an end after the Supreme Court ordered this week that the Holot facility be closed in 90 days' time. Now for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about even, here's a little background on a very important issue. Alright, so like the US, Israel has a very huge illegal immigration problem. The US has South America and Israel has Africa. Tens of thousands of Africans, particularly Sudanese and Eritreans, have reached Israel, often by foot and through hostile territory. Many of those fleeing their homelands are in Israel seeking refugee status, while others come looking for a brighter, more secure future. Though understandable to some extent, Israel has somewhat of an identity fetish, and when Israelis fear that the country's Jewish identity is threatened, the gloves come off in a pretty nasty way. Instead of following international law and providing shelter to asylum seekers while their cases are reviewed, the government, fueled by some extreme racism from the civilian population, aimed to keep the immigrants out by building a fence on the Egyptian border, a fence that I helped build during my military service. Now, I'll avoid details of exactly what I saw there personally, but I will say that Africans die of hunger and dehydration at that fence after walking for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. So then, to deal with the Africans who are already in Israel, the Holot facility was built, and laws were passed that allowed the government to keep detainees there for a full year without trial or even legal counsel. It was dubbed an open prison, meaning that those jailed there could leave the facility, but were required to check in several times a day at specific times. Failure to do so often resulted in African detainees being hauled off to a real prison for an undetermined amount of time. Holot's remote location, however, made it more than pointless to even leave the facility for just a few hours, effectively turning it into a full-time prison. Now, thanks to the hard work of human rights groups and a functioning democracy as well, the Supreme Court overturned key amendments to the immigration law that allowed for this terrible policy of jailing the innocent to continue. Now, just to be clear, I understand and I agree with the notion that Israel, being such a small country, can't integrate such a large number of immigrants, especially if the country is to remain a Jewish state. However, international law stipulates that upon reviewing individual cases, some of those who gain refugee status could in fact be assimilated, and a proper campaign to find additional countries to take in the rest could begin. Of course, sadly, but necessarily as well, those who had, in fact, no legitimate claim to refugee status could then be denied visas and removed from the country. Now, instead, laws passed by the Knesset, Israel's parliament, have given voice to a shameful culture of racism towards black people. And while the Supreme Court ruling to close Holot was a small victory for justice, the struggle isn't over yet. The troubles begin with the fact that Israel has no constitution. It's a notion that still, even after 7 years in this country, feels very strange for me as an American, and it puts the entire democratic system of checks and balances in doubt. And here's how. In light of the ruling, some politicians, Ayelet Shaked, are planning to amend one of the few laws that actually act as sort of Israel's permanent law, in order to limit the court's power to overturn a decision made by the Knesset. Now, one could argue this makes the government even more representative of the people's will. The people vote for the Knesset, and the Knesset gets to decide what's law and what isn't, and more accurately reflects the will of the people. But this would most surely result in flip-flopping back and forth on many issues over time, and would threaten Israel's status as a Western, modern democracy and a beacon in the Middle East. Now, the core of the problem is that a large number of Israelis want to kick the Africans out, and therefore elect politicians who think similarly. A fair number of Israelis would also like to see the Palestinians expelled from the West Bank and the land annexed. Does that mean it should be legal? A nation needs a collective core, a soul that remains steady and constant no matter what storms rage around it, and an intangible and disputable idea like Israel's Jewish identity just isn't enough. Israel needs a constitution just as much as it needs an army. See you next time.